Right. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here at the BMCC eShip Show. We are continuing our discussion about the Citizen Entrepreneur Explorers program. And that will be part of our discussion today as we go over this next step in the program. One of the things that we do inside the Citizen Entrepreneur Explorers program, though, is we're all about connecting people who are studying research or doing any type of original research back to their communities, back to their neighborhoods. So it's neighborhood first, community first type research. It is original research. So these are the types of projects and things that we're pulling together and making relevant are how do we take the basic steps of research, like formulating a research question, coming up with a methodology, doing up the data collection itself, doing an analysis, and then finally, which is special about the Citizen Entrepreneur Explorers program, how do we actually report it all back to our community? So this is a really important step. The data gathering is a chance for you to actually get out and connect to your community. And so Jessica Pitts is going to be talking us through this step today. Raymond's going to be throwing in his 17 cents into the mix of things. And then we'll all have our own specific stories around it. We love doing these for each individual step because it gives you, the person who's attempting to do original research, some basic steps about getting out into your neighborhood and making it a success. So Jessica, welcome to this webinar.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. I'm a research assistant for the CEEP program, first year PhD student in developmental psychology, and I basically help with the research process. So today we're going to be talking about CEEP data collection. That's the step we're on right now.
Excellent. And then Raymond, dive right in. Tell us a quick intro for yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Raymond. I'm a second-year student studying for my master's in financial engineering at NYU 10. It's my third semester with Professor Snipes on the CEEP program, and I'm glad to be here.
Great. So first slide up, Jessica. Okay. You'll see this is an introduction for what we'll be talking about today. We are excited to have the data collection component highlighted and deep diving into this particular piece of it. So I'll let Jessica take it from here.
Okay. Yeah. So when we talk about data collection, we're talking about the kind of the meat of the project. So this is about, so you set up your research question already. You have thought about your survey methods or your interview methods protocol. You've written your questions. You've thought about them, how they're going to capture what you're trying to measure. And now you go out and you collect data. So you go out and talk to people, you send out surveys. So this is that part of the step. And so just to give you an overview of what data collection is, what we're talking about for data collection. So this is where you implement your survey methods and you collect the data for your study. So some tips for data collection. So when someone is first collecting data, it can be an intimidating process, because especially if you are interviewing people face to face or online, you may not have experience with that. So for the advice that I would give to anybody starting with data collection is to create a list of potential participants to complete surveys or interviews. You can do just a quick Google search for local businesses in your area. So to see what's around based on your question, what is actually in your neighborhood? So that would be your population. And then your population generally within. So for example, if I am interested in local restaurants in my area, and say, my area has a lot of restaurants. So there's 30 restaurants. So that's the population I'm that's the population that I'm working with in my area. But my sample might be less than that, because not everyone will respond, not everyone will want to participate. So my sample will be lower than that. So my tip, I guess, for advice is you really want to reach out to as many people as possible, specifically if you're trying to send out a survey. So if there are 30 restaurants that you see on Google Maps, you try to get the contact information of all of the restaurants and send out, emails or have phone calls for people to participate. So you get the greatest chance of increasing your sample size. So to reach out to a business, you can use a template email. So we have that in our CEEP research guide. So how to contact a business. And you just want to introduce yourself and provide information about your project. So you just want to let them know, what college you're from, kind of what class. You don't want to get too specific, but you just want to let them know that, this is for a research project in this class, and this is what my project is about generally. So you give them a little bit of context. Maybe that will persuade them to participate. I think it is a good point of practice to keep a record of all interviews and surveys you administer. So if you are administering surveys through Google Forms, it keeps a record for you. So I believe you can set up in the Google Sheets that it will tell you when a person actually took your survey. So keeping record of that, it makes it a little bit more clearer when you're doing data analysis later on, which is a step you talked about previously.
Yeah, I'll add in there too, for that point, Jessica. It is really important when you're thinking about data collection to look at your big picture. So consider the fact, am I submitting a set of surveys? Because if I have a certain methodology that I've chosen, which is surveying, if you go in that direction, know that you're going to need a higher number. So you're going to have to reach out to a lot of people to get a certain number of yeses or a certain number of confirmations that people have submitted their surveys. On the other side, if you do interviews, you can have a smaller sample size because it does take time and energy to conduct each interview, whereas a survey is each individual person's time that they might take to do it. One other tip when it comes to surveying that I would say is if you're going to do surveys, consider doing a survey, a paper survey, and going from restaurant to restaurant. These types of research projects that CEEP is really all about is you connecting to your local neighborhood. So the more you actually get down on the street and talk to the people in those shops and connect to the neighborhood itself, the better off you are. People are more likely to say yes to you coming in with a quick survey and saying, hey, I'm just a college student. I just am trying to complete this assignment. Would you answer these 5 questions, and have a little clipboard and have them like fill the survey out for you. And then you can log that back in when you get home and keep good track of it. So that's another way to really get your numbers up when you're talking about survey data. You still might get some email responses, but you'll want to add to that possibly with other ways of connecting. That's what we found with a lot of our students.
Yeah, great point. Also, I got this question. So to further differentiate between interviews and surveys, so an interview is more in depth. So you're asking more open-ended questions compared to a survey. So a survey, even if you administer a survey in person, so I have a whole bunch of multiple choice questions and I go in person and ask the person and I check off for them. That is not an interview. So I just want to differentiate those two. Even if you are actually writing in things and taking notes or just writing their answers, that's typically not an interview style. It's more in-depth and open-ended for interviews. Just want to make that point. So I guess we can move on. Okay, yeah. So we're moving on to consent. So this is a big part of data collection. So with everything you collect, you want consent. So you always ask participants, will you participate? It could be just simple, like, will you take the survey for me? And if they say yes, then you can continue. It can be written or oral. Usually it will be oral, or you can write it out. It's good practices. It's a good practice just for the research process. And the participants should be able to withdraw consent at any time. So one thing that has come up during my time with CEEP is So for example, if someone's doing an interview, people have done interviews where they've collected all this data. And for interviews, you usually want to record the person so that you can go back and transcribe the interview and for posterity, you have what the person actually said instead of notes, which can change and shift what that person actually said. So for example, someone may consent to participate, like, yeah, I can give you this information, I can talk with you in an interview style, but they may not want to be recorded. That has happened in the past. So what do you do in that case? You have to find a new participant who agrees to, one, participate, and also agrees to be recorded, because then you wouldn't be able to use that person in your analysis. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll add to what you're saying there. And you can drop this slide for just a second, because when we're talking about the idea of consent, researches are really, especially if you're doing an interview, it can become quite a personal thing. So someone may say like, oh, I didn't mean to say that, or that's not really on the record, or is this going to be anonymous? So at any point, someone might say to you, look, I can't do this anymore. Like I'm not able to take part in this research. That's okay. And we as researchers can never be offended by that, right? Like research is a personal choice to take part in. They're not doing you any favors by doing this, right? Like if anything, you're asking them to do you a favor. So they may feel at some point that they can't do that. So we can never, ever, ever take that personally. And all we can say is, oh, I'm so sorry. Didn't mean to offend you or anything, but that's not a problem at all. I'll move on to another person. And then, of course, you can be the type of person that say, would you happen to know another person who might want to be interviewed who's running a business in the neighborhood? So don't lose the chance to stay connected with the business person and build that relationship.
Definitely. All right. So, yeah, I think that's all I have to say about consent. Just make sure you ask for consent. It could just be a simple like, yes, I agree to participate. Yes, I want to take your survey. Yes, you can interview me. But it goes a long way in the research process. Okay, so a question that I have received from a few students. So how many businesses and people should I contact for my research? And as I was saying before in the beginning, you want to get as many as possible. So a lot. You want a lot. You want as many as possible. So for example, going back to the previous example, if there's 30 restaurants in your neighborhood, ideally if for a survey, obviously it depends on what kind of methods you're using, but for a survey, generally you would want to contact the 30 restaurants that you have in your neighborhood, depending on your research question. Now, if it's for an interview, you still want to get the maximum amount loud, but that number may shift. So if you're looking for more in-depth interviews, and you're looking maybe for 2 to 3 in-depth, maybe 2 interviews, maybe you want to contact 6 people, because not everyone would want or has time to sit down and do like a 5 to 10 minute interview with you. Usually you should aim for like 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a lot of content for an interview, so it does add up, but maybe that's a bigger hassle than someone taking a 10 question survey. So it all depends on your research methods, but you really want to maximize your data set. So you want to maximize your sample size of how many people you're reaching out to. Okay, so how many businesses and people should I contact for my research? So this goes on my previous point. So you will usually start with a larger population size, and your sample size, which is the sample that you're using for your data analysis in this project, is going to typically always be lower than who you could potentially reach out to, because of what we said before. People may not want to participate.
So Jessica, I have a question for you. What if I'm petrified of talking to people and I don't know how to do that, and I just want help on getting over that piece of it?
I would say email is the best bet. even though you may not have the best response with specifically certain types of businesses, may not have emails, or the emails are like, they don't go directly to the manager or the owner. So that may not be the best optimal way. Or I think the most direct way is phone call. I know it is nerve-wracking. No one does phone calls anymore, but phone calls can be a way, because a lot of, I'm just sticking with restaurants. If you go into a restaurant, they may be busy. So if you do a phone call, like a cold phone call, that could, you may not get, consent at that first phone call, but you can get like, the best time to call back when someone can actually take your questions, or you can talk to them a little bit more in depth. So I think just practice, I guess.
So Jessica, can I add one piece?
Yeah.
So when I was in college, we used to do fundraisers out in the community, in the neighborhood and stuff. We would have an opportunity just to like step out and, ask to support us when we're doing like some kind of run or some kind of sport thing. I was on the swim team, so we would have like competitive like swimming fundraisers. And you go around to the businesses. It is really intimidating to do that. I have to say, I remember back to that feeling the first time that I was just standing in front of somebody and asking them for something, right? Like, it is very, very intimidating. I have to say, though, it was one of the most important skills that I got out of that part of my life, because it helped me, first off, to be able to speak to strangers and strike up a conversation. How do I have to present myself? How friendly do I have to present myself in order for people to want to talk to me, right? Versus coming in with, maybe your personality is a little like shy or reserved. A lot of people, especially once you tell them you're doing it for an assignment, will immediately go, "Oh my God, I can relate to you trying to get this assignment done. Here, let me help you. How long do you need?" Or they may say, "Look, I don't have time right now, but I will help you. Here's my cell number. Here's my text." Raymond, what have you heard from some of your students trying to get this step done and finished?
I guess one of the things, and the reason why this talk is really important, is uh, needing to persevere. Because over a period of time, you might not get the response rate that you wish you would have. So the small advice and tidbits that I think Jessica's been sharing is actually really helpful. We're basically improving your response rate and making sure that every single survey or interview you do, you get a good response. Because one of the things I've heard over the past semesters that's rather discouraging is some students might find that they're not getting a good response rate, and that they're feeling rather burnt out when they're sending out surveys and interview requests, but they're not getting anyone to respond.
And I'll add that this is part of the entrepreneurial component. It sort of builds on the mindset that we need to have in any kind of situation, whether it's searching for a job, or going for something else that you're looking to, or asking for a raise, or any of those circumstances where you have to stand in front of someone and ask them for something. This is a great example of that. How to be confident and at the same time friendly. So being confident and like overly, what's the word? You can be confident and almost have an air of arrogance. And I know that almost never works for most people in these circumstances. And Jessica, like you were saying, Raymond, I think Jessica's tips and tricks are very helpful here. She's been there to like help walk people through all kinds of things. So I appreciate this one.
Yeah, I think it's also important to know that, like, even if I'm doing research, like in my own research, data collection usually doesn't get easier. There are other tools. So there's Qualtrics that collects data samples and things like that, but it's still kind of pulling people from samples, and it's a very tedious process. So it's not just you feeling overwhelmed. It is a big step to actually get a sample. So we can move on to yeah, so like the next thing we're going to talk about is basically how to reach out. So we kind of touched on some of these points, but I just want to state them again so we just can reiterate that. So you want to state your name, You want to state your name, your affiliation with BMCC or whatever college you are affiliated with, and generally what your research question / topic is. So you don't have to have everything figured out. You can just give your general topic so that they know kind of, it's a part of a larger concept of informed consent. So generally what that means is that the person knows, kind of why they're like, what the study is, and so they're making an informed choice to participate. So maybe the research question is something that they don't want to participate in, and they don't, agree with their topic or whatever, and so they don't want to participate, but you have to let them know that ahead of time. We usually wouldn't run into that problem, but it's a good practice to just let them know what your question or topic is. And this applies both for in-person and online contact. So if you're just emailing, just try to get your sample size, or you're going in person, you still want to have this introduction and all, to kind of set expectations. So yeah, if you're interviewing, schedule a time to interview, or if you're administering a survey, let the person know when you expect the survey to be completed. So setting a deadline or timeline, it really helps you in the end. Specifically, so if you're sending out a link to your survey, say on Google Forms or whatever, a person, I mean, your survey shouldn't be super long. It should be like 10 or 11 questions max, depending on your research question. But maybe, you have a few. You can also, just to go back, you can also have kind of a mixed methods. So if you do want to add some open-ended questions in there, but maybe they're like a shorter response than, someone normally would have in an interview style, you can add an open-ended question. So you can ask them, you can just have a little text box where they just give you a little summary. It's not an in-depth thing, but it's still not like a multiple choice or choose an answer kind of thing. So you can definitely have both. And yeah, so this is just general tips. Yeah, it's anything else I'm missing that you would contribute? I think that's all. Yeah, it's kind of just setting an expectation with the person that you're trying to include in your study.
Yeah. And Jessica, to add to what you're saying there, how to reach out to businesses, it may sound like we're oversimplifying what you have to do because of the feeling that you have when you're actually about to do it. It's like, so whatever that feeling of anxiety you have, Raymond used the perfect word, which is persevere, right? Like just walk through that feeling to complete the step, right? Because we're giving you the different tools. We're giving you the samples of the emails that you can use. We're giving you suggestions of types of questions you might ask. We're also, even the basic stuff of just immediately talking about who you are before you try to like ask them a lot of questions. That little piece of it, you'll find that you'll fall into a rhythm, especially if you decide to do surveys in person, right? And collect the data with the person marking the answers down with the people that you're talking to, because you're going to end up talking to a dozen or 2 dozen businesses during that time frame for surveys. And you'll get into a flow. It'll start to like really, really flow for you. And it will be okay. I promise you. None of my students have ever died from a heart attack from having been asked to do research out in their community. I promise you, no matter how much you feel, walking through that is going to be a very, very powerful step for you. It was for me the first few times that I had to do it when I was doing the fundraising type work. And for a minute, I did door-to-door sales. This was back like way before the internet was even happening. So people don't even know what that is these days, but there used to be people who walked around and like knocked on your door and tried to sell you stuff. So these days it's all done online. Amazon has taken care of that business model. And we don't really do that so much anymore. Yeah. So Jessica, you want to close us out?
Yeah. So I just want to have a few more things to say. So just going back to informed consent. So a person doesn't have to answer all your questions, even if it's a survey. usually good practices, you want to, full answer to each question you have on a survey, but if a person feels uncomfortable, they do have, they should have the ability to skip a question, just a general practice. But it usually doesn't usually come up in these research projects because you're usually not asking such sensitive questions. But for example, if you're doing an analysis and you're asking about the ethnicity or race of participants and they don't want to answer that, they do not have to answer that. So you can't force someone to answer a question. So yeah, and let's see. Don't share my screen. Yes, so we have, you can stop by our website, citizenpreneurs.com, to check out our downloadable resources. So we have a whole guide that takes you through each step. There's worksheets that you can look at that really divide each step up so that you can follow along. So there's guides on data collection where you can get some more information about kind of general standard practices in data collection. So I hope this was very informative and kind of reduces kind of some anxiety around data collection, because it is normal to have those feelings and experiences. But as any good researcher with practice, it may become more comfortable or maybe not, but it's still a good practice, a skill to have. Yeah, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you guys being here with us. Continue following along. We'll have your other steps coming up real soon. Looking forward to